Hey everybody, what's up? Ehren here, Question Period Canada. As promised, our new format, all English all the time. A great reduction in the amount of delays that the new Mr. Speaker causes, because that's annoying. Greg's annoying. We don't include him very much. We're giving you a concentrated dose of information and some entertainment in there. Hope you like the format. This is what we're doing. Question Period. This is from November 20th. They're the highlights.
Speaker, after 8 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost of mortgage payments, which are already up 150%, and the Bank of Canada and the Parliamentary Budget Officer now agree with me that his deficits are driving up interest rates. Scotiabank says deficits are driving mortgage rates up 2%. That works out to $700 per month. While carpenters and nurses are already living in their cars, and the IMF says Canada's mortgage holders are the most at risk of crisis. Will the Prime Minister finally accept my common sense plan and announce the date and the plan to balance the budget and bring down interest rates on Canadian mortgages so people don't lose their homes?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, let's be clear and accurate. Much of that spending referred to by the Leader of the Opposition was provincial in nature, not federal, Mr. Speaker. And in addition, unlike the Conservatives, Mr. Speaker, we actually have a plan to help Canadians, especially vulnerable Canadians, and the Deputy Prime Minister will table additional aspects of that plan tomorrow in the fall economic statement. But let's be clear, we are here for Canadians every single step of the way, unlike the party opposite that votes against every single time, Mr. Speaker.
As per usual, Poilievre was up first. He went at Anita Anand. She's the person that answered. She's the president of the Treasury Board of Canada. She's been in Parliament since 2019. She's from Ontario. She has a pretty terrible voice though, right? Try to listen to that. Anyhow, right after that, Poilievre's going again, this time against Sean Lawless. He's the Minister of Housing.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's plan is to increase mortgage payments by 150%, which he's already done. And now Scotiabank says government deficits have added 2 percentage points to interest rates. That works out to $700 a month, or $8,400 a year in higher mortgage payments linked directly to deficits, including the massive deficits by this government. A year ago, they promised a balanced budget. They broke the promise 6 months later. Will they come back tomorrow with a plan to balance the budget so we can bring down interest rates and inflation so that Canadians can keep their homes?
Yes.
The Honourable Minister for Housing.
Mr. Speaker, with respect, we have a plan that's going to build more homes, that's going to restore a level of affordability in the market. Where we are cutting taxes on home builders, he wants to raise them. Where we are funding cities to increase their ambition on home building, he wants to cut them. Mr. Speaker, it is hard to accept criticisms from a member of the House of Commons who, when he had the opportunity to be the minister responsible for housing, had access to $300 million and only got 99 homes built. Mr. Speaker, we are going to build homes, and we are going to build them by the millions.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, when I was housing minister, mortgage payments were less than half of what they are now, and rent was less than half of what it is now. Those are the hard realities. And now his plan, the Prime Minister's plan, is to quadruple the carbon tax. Quadruple it. That will increase the cost of gas, heat, groceries, and yes, even housing, because it takes trucks to ship those building materials. We know that we will have a carbon tax election to decide on whether we axe the tax as I choose or whether we hike it as he promises. But can we accept a Canadian compromise and at least freeze the tax in the meantime? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister for Housing and Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, it's interesting to listen to this version of revisionist history of the honourable member's time as a minister responsible for housing. If we actually go back and look at the numbers, you're going to see that he actually had housing starts less than 200,000 a year. Mr. Speaker, this morning we've seen data that shows that we're on pace to build more than 256,000 this year. If we want to compare apples to apples, Mr. Speaker, we're going to make a difference. Do you like apples? We're going to beat his numbers. How do you like them apples?
Position.
I think the minister should stick to photo ops because comedy is surely not his thing. Neither are numbers, Mr. Speaker. Everything the Prime Minister has said about the Stellantis subsidy is proven false. One, it's billions of dollars over budget before shovels in the ground, years behind payback even before the project begins, and he claimed that it was going to create jobs for Canadians. We now learn that at least 1,500 or a majority of the jobs are going to go to temporary foreign workers. Will the Prime Minister release the contract now so that we can find out how much Canadian taxpayers are going to have to spend to give paychecks to South Korean workers?
The Honourable Minister for Housing and Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, during the COVID-19 pandemic, he opposed spending that was supporting families. Now, during a national housing crisis, he opposes government investments that are actually going to get more homes built. And when we have the opportunity to make generational investments that's going to gain a toehold in a new industry, he opposes it without vision for what the future economy could be when we create many thousands of jobs. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to invest in the Canadian economy and put workers make sure they bring home paychecks that are going to put food on the table for their families.
Hear, hear.
So Sean Fraser should stick to not making jokes. When he tried to make that apple joke, how do you like them apples? He messed it up so poorly. It was really funny. Up next, Daniel Blanky has got a question for Sean as well. He's an NDP MP representing Manitoba.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bill C-56 certainly, and I think after some improvement by New Democrats, is going to help a little bit with the housing crisis, but it's certainly not going to solve the housing crisis. The Fall Economic Statement is an important opportunity to make further progress both on the housing crisis and the affordability crisis. We've got funds that have been depleted for social housing that need to be replenished, and there's further work to do on strengthening competition laws in Canada. So are these initiatives that we're going to see in the Fall Economic Statement, or are Canadians going to be left waiting again?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. He knows that he and I will both wait for tomorrow to see the details of the Fall Economic Statement. However, I do want to signal my intent to continue the pattern of investment in affordable housing in particular that's going to make sure everyone in this country has a safe and affordable place to call home. Mr. Speaker, over the 30 years that preceded our time in government, governments of different stripe chose not to make the necessary investments to ensure that we had sufficient affordable housing stock. We're going to continue to make the investments that are necessary in affordable housing to restore something to the ecosystem, and that's a level of affordability that we desperately need.
Up next, Jajraj Holland. He's an MP from Alberta, and he's really, really well spoken. It's interesting here, he's using a Polyev tactic at the end of his question where he says, answer yes or no, please. He goes at Rachel Bendayan, and then who does he go after? Jonathan Wilkinson after that.
The Honourable Member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
After 8 long years, the Governor of the Bank of Canada confirmed that this Prime Minister and his scam of the century, the carbon tax, are not worth the cost. Scrapping this scam would put a massive dent in inflation and help lower interest rates faster, all at a time when Canadians are choosing between eating and heating their homes because of liberal inflation and because of the carbon tax. Will the Finance Minister accept our Conservative leaders' common sense ask to axe their plans to quadruple their carbon tax in tomorrow's false promise update? Yes or no?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm truly glad to hear the Conservative member opposite be so excited for tomorrow's fall economic update, Mr. Speaker. You see, the Minister of Finance and the Deputy Prime Minister will be in this House at 4 p.m. tomorrow to reveal our books and to show the plan that we have prepared for Canadians, Mr. Speaker. This is an important moment of transparency for Canadians to see where we are at and where we are going. An important moment as well for Conservatives to actually see the numbers and use the facts in order to have intelligent debate in this House.
The honourable member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
Well, more photo ops aren't going to help anyone here in Canada, Mr. Speaker. And what we won't do as a Conservative government is create two classes of Canadians like this Liberal NDP government did by giving 3% of Canadians in Atlantic Canada, where the Prime Minister's poll numbers were tanking, a break, while the rest of Canadians get absolutely nothing and have to freeze and starve in the dark. 2 million Canadians are visiting a food bank in a month. This in just a single month. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost after 8 years. Will they cancel their plan to quadruple their carbon tax in tomorrow's false hopes update? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What the honourable member says is both factually incorrect and grossly misleading. We have put a price on pollution in this country, one that actually helps us to address the existential threat that is climate change, but do so in a manner that is affordable. 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back than they pay in the carbon price. It is a manner that is affordable for Canadians, at the same time taking on and addressing what is a clear threat to the future of our children. It is such a shame that in this country we still have a political party that doesn't believe that climate change is real.
I don't know Alex Chambers very well, but I do find he's pretty interesting. He's got a couple of questions for Rachel Bendayan here. She's the secretary for Chrystia Freeland. Anyhow, Alex asks really interesting questions here. Check it out.
The honourable member from Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of out-of-control spending by this Liberal government, experts at Scotiabank now say that 2 percentage point of interest rate increases are due to government spending. An extra 2% on mortgage costs means over $8,000 a year for Canadian borrowers. Canadians are realizing this Prime Minister's not worth the cost. When Scotiabank says you're richer than you think, they didn't mean spend like drunken sailors. So on what date will the government balance the budget?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, let's speak about balance, because our government believes that you can balance compassion with fiscal responsibility, and that is what we have shown up to date, Mr. Speaker. Canada continues to have the lowest deficit among all G7 countries. Canada continues to have the lowest debt-to-GDP ratio among all G7 countries. And the very report that member is citing, Mr. Speaker, states that the major drivers of interest rate increases were COVID supports and provincial spending, not federal spending, but provincial spending, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we won't apologize for having Canadians' backs while being responsible.
The honourable member from Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, my message for any provincial premier is the same as the message for the Prime Minister. Take responsibility for the government spending, because it's driving inflation and making interest rates unaffordable for Canadians. The Bank of Canada says that all governments need to spend less than 2% in order to keep inflation under control. This own government's projections in the budget in the spring says that this government will spend over 3.5% growth next year versus this year. So when are they going to get it? They are part of the problem. They have to balance the budget so Canadians can keep their homes.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite talks about responsibility. It's this government that took its responsibility seriously. When times were tough, when COVID hit, and even today, Mr. Speaker, we continue to have Canadians' backs. We don't just talk about compassion, Mr. Speaker. We act in that manner by being there for vulnerable Canadians, by being there in order to lift over 2.3 million Canadians out of poverty, by ensuring over 1 million more Canadians have a job today than they did before COVID. Mr. Speaker, we are there for Canadians while being fiscally responsible, and I am certainly looking forward to tomorrow's Trudeau's fiscal update.
Carrie Lynn Finlay is a member of Parliament from British Columbia. She's got a couple of questions about housing, so Sean Fraser's going to get up and try to dance around it. He's always flapping his arms.
White Rock.
After 8 years of this NDP Liberal government and 2 years of their housing accelerator, photo ops are up exponentially, but investment in housing construction is down 14%. The Prime Minister promised to make housing more affordable. What has he delivered? Nothing but photos of suits in boots. Canada has the lowest number of housing units per capita in the G7. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. When will he put aside his photo op obsession and focus on roofs over heads and keys indoors?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, it's an excellent question, if only if it were based in fact. The member has claimed that, in fact, investment in housing has gone down. I read from the Stats Canada report issued just this morning that multi-unit construction rose 8.2% to $6.6 billion in September, with all provinces reporting gains. Mr. Speaker, residential builds up 7.3% to $12.9 billion. With respect to the Housing Accelerator Fund, we have deals with Kitchener, Calgary, Kelowna, cities across the country, totaling over the next 10 years more than 175,000 more homes. They promised to cut it.
The Honourable Member from South Surrey, White Rock.
Mr. Speaker, photo ops don't build homes. We need more homes in Canada, a lot more, not less. 14% less year over year is what failure looks like. We need homes, not bureaucracy. Since this housing minister took over, investment in housing construction is still plummeting, down 14% year over year. After 8 years, rent and down payments have doubled and mortgages are up 150%. When will this Prime Minister stop the photo ops, let builders build so Canadians can move into homes they can afford?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I hate to delight in such a moment where the Honourable Member in good faith tries to pose a question but just doesn't have the facts. She has claimed that investment has plummeted literally on the day that Stats Canada has indicated it's increased by 7.3%. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the strategy we're going to use to build more homes, we're going to change the math to make it work for builders by reducing taxes. They plan to raise it. We want to change the way that cities build homes by putting money on the table. They plan to cut it. We will make the investments necessary. We will engage with the sector and other levels of government to get more homes built, whatever it takes.
There's housing issues everywhere. Lori Idlout, she's from Nunavut. She's an MP from up there. She has questions for Dan Vandal. Dan Vandal does not look good, guys, here. He looks like he's a little shaky.
Honourable Member from Nunavut.
If the Liberals say that they will do whatever it takes for housing, Nunavut needs $250 million. One-third of Nunavut live in homes needing major repairs, and over 50% in my riding are in overcrowded homes. The situation is so bad that TB outbreaks in 2 more communities were announced earlier this year. Last year, the government of Nunavut asked the Liberals for $200 million to build urgently needed housing. So far, they got zero. Will the Minister of Finance announce tomorrow the housing funding that Nunavut desperately needs?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for that very important question. We are fully engaged with the government of Nunavut, with Inuit rights holders on this important issue. In 2022, we announced $4 billion for Indigenous rights holders, including $800 million for Inuit rights holders. We have $4 billion as well for the rural, northern, and urban strategy, something we were going to roll out in the months to come.
Still more questions for Sean Fraser. The housing crisis is really keeping his plate full. He seems like a busy guy. These questions are from Rachel Thomas. She's an MP from Lethbridge, Alberta.
Promised to make life more affordable for Canadians when he took office, but after 8 years of this Liberal government, rent has doubled, mortgage payments have skyrocketed, and housing prices have doubled as well. Just in today, we found out that housing construction rates are actually down by 14% concerning investment. Only this Liberal government would use a housing accelerator fund to decelerate housing. Contrary to Liberal belief, photo ops don't build houses. I know this is news. So when will the housing minister stop the photo ops and actually get some work done?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member has concerns about the use of photo ops, I'd suggest she discuss with her leader why he shows up at projects that he had nothing to do with to take a photo and then uses homelessness as a political prop for his social media. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that member knows that we have a plan to build more homes. It's to cut taxes and to put money on the table for home building. They want to raise taxes and cut that money for home building. Mr. Speaker, I was in the honourable member's province just last week announcing a $228 million agreement that's going to see the City of Calgary add more than 35,000 homes over the next 10 years. We're going to continue to do the work that's necessary to get...
The Honourable Member from Lethbridge.
What the honourable member knows is this. Rent prices have doubled, house prices have doubled, mortgage rates have skyrocketed, and investment in housing construction is down 14%. This minister just isn't getting the job done, despite his promises to Canadians. So when will he stop the photo ops and actually get to work so that Canadians can have a roof over their head?
The Honourable Minister, rather, for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, with respect to the honourable member, she's saying that investments are down. In her province, Stats Canada indicated this morning it's up 10.6%. The reality is the numbers are continuing to increase because of the measures we're putting on the table. When we decided to eliminate GST, we saw announcements that are going to lead to 300,000 homes over the next decade. With respect to the Housing Accelerator Fund, the changes cities are making so far have unlocked 175,000 homes. Mr. Speaker, we are going to continue to make the investments necessary to get more homes built over and above the hundreds of thousands that the National Housing Strategy has already delivered.
Mike Barrett is up next in Scandals. Scandals, guys. He's asking questions about scandals, all this spending the Liberals have been doing. He always does it, but he's pretty entertaining here.
From Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Years of this Prime Minister, it's easy to see he's not worth the cost as the seams come apart at his billion-dollar green slush fund. The NDP Liberal government's hand-picked chair funneled more than $200,000 to her own company and then put $120,000 of that into her own pockets. Now she's being investigated by the Ethics Commissioner, so she resigned days after the Chief Executive Officer. We're just scratching the surface on the latest of this Prime Minister's many scandals, and Canadians want to know who got rich.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Distribute taxpayer dollars, however independent of the federal government ministry. We all should expect them to do so responsibly. And that's why the Minister of Innovation acted immediately when allegations of mismanagement surfaced. We've frozen funds, ordered an independent review, are collaborating with the Auditor General, and both the CEO and the board chair have stepped down. We are holding SDTC accountable, and we're committed to getting to the bottom of this issue. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
They're not holding anyone accountable. Let's just get a couple facts on the record. The board chair, handpicked by this Prime Minister, funneled more than $200,000 to her own company. So the Ethics Commissioner launched an investigation and she quit. They found more than $40 million in ineligible payments. So the Auditor General launched an investigation and the CEO quit. This government is doing absolutely nothing. So before the paper shredders get fired up over at Green Slush Fund headquarters, will the minister agree that a parliamentary inquiry needs to be expanded so we can get all the information in the latest scandal involving this Prime Minister and their corrupt government?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. The member opposite's question, he's not entitled to his own facts. We know that the board chair of SDTC was appointed by multiple governments, including a Conservative government in the past. The Minister of Innovation has accepted the resignation of the chair of the board of STTC. A process will begin soon to find a new leadership team. Our government is committed to ensure that organizations which receive federal funding adhere to the highest standards of governance, and we are committed to getting to the bottom of the allegations. Thank you.
Now that Mike Barrett has brought up scandals, that seems to be on everybody's mind. Two of my favorites up next. Larry Brock is asking about scandals, and so is Stephanie Cousy. Stephanie Cousy's from Alberta, Larry Brock's from Ontario. Dominique LeBlanc answers these questions, but I think he's just trying to bore them to sleep because there doesn't really seem to be an answer. Scandals!
Member from Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, it's time for this NDP Liberal government to end the cover-ups and come clean with Canadians about the Arrive Camp scandal. Two senior bureaucrats were caught lying to committee about their role in hiring a two-person basement company for the $54 million Arrive scam. With cozy relationships with this government, GC Strategies was hired over Deloitte, Microsoft, and Apple. Outrageous. Which Liberal minister hired the company and paid them 11 million taxpayer dollars for doing absolutely nothing?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've said repeatedly that we expect all public officials responsible for contracting to follow the appropriate rules. In this case, the Canadian Border Services Agency identified irregularities during a routine audit and referred the matter to the appropriate authorities that are investigating. And Mr. Speaker, people who did not follow the appropriate contracting rules will face the consequences according to law.
Yep.
Even ministers?
The Honourable Member from Calgary-Mindapore.
After 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, one thing is clear. They have no respect for the Canadian taxpayer. GC Strategies, a two-person company working out of their basement, got paid $11 million to send messages on LinkedIn to other companies to build the ArriveCan app. This Prime Minister is simply not worth the cost. Bureaucrats refuse to say who signed the paper to hire GC Strategies for $11 million. So I'm going to ask this Liberal caucus, which Liberal minister paid $11 million for GC Strategies?
For my members, all questions do go through the chair. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, just because our colleague repeats the same silly premise to the question doesn't make it accurate. She knows very well that the authorities in these contracting matters are in the hands of public servants, and we've said very clearly, Mr. Speaker, that the committee can investigate and should investigate these matters. The Canadian Border Services Agency uncovered the contracting challenge, Mr. Speaker, in an internal audit and did what is appropriate, referred it to the appropriate authorities, and those who didn't follow the rules will be held accountable under law.
The last question here is from Rick Perkins. He's an MP from Nova Scotia here. Interesting thing, he's asking about a battery plant in Ontario and whether or not Canadians will be the employees that work at this plant.
The NDP Liberal government is subsidizing $15 billion to the giant auto company Stellantis for their Windsor plant to employ up to 1,600 foreign workers. Every mom on a minimum wage, every couple struggling with their monthly mortgage payment, every union assembly line worker across this country will pay $1,000 to employ these foreign workers. After 8 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Will the Prime Minister reverse his decision and commit that all jobs at the Stellantis plant will go to Canadian paychecks and not foreign workers?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, as a Windsorite, I am proud that it was this Liberal government that delivered the battery plant for Windsor, including 2,500 jobs. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work with unions. We'll continue to work with Stellantis to make sure that local Canadian workers are prioritized. It's 2,500 good jobs will be created at this plant. Those are the facts, Mr. Speaker. We believe in Canadian workers. We believe in electric vehicles. We believe in climate change. Why is the Conservative leader so against the battery plant, so against Canadian workers, and is completely empty on climate change?
So that just about wraps up the show, everyone. I hope that you've been enjoying the new format. We've been trying to cut the fat, no more Mr. Speaker, getting rid of the translators, and bringing you the information in a concentrated dose. A little bit of entertainment as well. My name's Ehren. This is Question Period Canada. Like and subscribe. We'll be back tomorrow. Check us out. Have a good night. To send you off, we're going to show you one more time when Sean Fraser tried to make the joke about the apples. How do you like them apples? Because he dropped the ball. It's kind of funny. We'll take a second peek. Catch you later.
It's interesting to listen to this version of revisionist history of the honourable member's time as a minister responsible for housing. If we actually go back and look at the numbers, you're going to see that he actually had housing starts less than 200,000 a year. Mr. Speaker, this morning we've seen data that shows that we're on pace to build more than 256,000 this year. If we want to compare apples to apples, Mr. Speaker, we're going to make a difference. Do you like apples? We're going to beat his numbers. How do you like them apples?